Hello and welcome. It's 10 a.m. on Friday, the 4th of July. You're tuned into our mid-morning newscast here on Arirang TV. Let's take a look at what's making the headlines. The leaders of South Korea and China vow to make the Korean Peninsula a nuclear weapons-free zone as they warn North Korea against going ahead with a fourth nuclear test. The two countries also pledged to complete a free trade agreement. Chinese President Xi Jinping says he hopes the accord is completed within the next 6 months and the annual two-way trade increases to $300 billion in 2015. Plus, Japan will ease a handful of sanctions against North Korea in return for Pyongyang reopening a probe into the fate of Japanese nationals it kidnapped decades ago. Seoul calls for discussions between the two countries to be transparent. But our top story this morning, the leaders of South Korea and China have reiterated that they are firmly opposed to the development of nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula. In a joint declaration following summit talks on Thursday, President Park Geun-hye, in visiting Chinese President Xi Jinping, also said the two countries would strengthen economic and cultural cooperation. There was, however, no specific mention of Tokyo's recent historical denials. Choi-sun starts us off.
President Park and Xi's message for North Korea Thursday was certainly a step up from last year's use of the phrase grave threat regarding the North's nuclear program.
저와 시 주석님은 한반도에서의 핵무기 개발에 확고히 반대한다는 입장을 재확인하고
Denuclearization, peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula would benefit all six-party talk nations, and the participating members should achieve these through dialogue and negotiations.
Highlighting the now suspended six-party talks involving the two Koreas, Presidents Park and Xi added that the right conditions must be met before reviving the dialogue. This reflects Seoul's position that Pyongyang first needs to show its commitment to denuclearize. The Chinese leader also positively assessed President Park's policy of trust building and having more humanitarian exchanges with North Korea to lay the foundation for a peaceful reunification. As for Seoul-Beijing ties, the two leaders assessed their strategic cooperative partnership and agreed to take it to the next level by holding regular political and security meetings and increasing people-to-people exchanges. On the economic front, Presidents Park and Xi agreed to work toward concluding their free trade negotiations by the year's end and to open their currency trade markets to spur bilateral trade and investments. Attention now shifts to how Pyongyang will react to Seoul and Beijing's firm opposition to its nuclear ambitions. While very cautious to criticize its traditional ally, experts suggest North Korea may turn away from China for now and focus on improving ties with Japan and Russia. Choi-sun, Arirang News.
Well, as we could see there, North Korea wasn't the only topic of conversation for President Park and Xi during their summit on Thursday. Economic matters were also very high on the agenda, and both leaders came to a number of agreements to strengthen their bilateral business ties. Hwang Sang-yi reports.
President Park Geun-hye and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed Thursday to speed up bilateral free trade talks so they can strike a deal by the end of this year. Negotiations date back to 2012, but the two countries are at odds over removing tariffs on sensitive items: agricultural and fishery products for Seoul and petrochemical, steel and machinery goods for Beijing. If and when it goes into effect, the deal is expected to boost trade between the two countries, which stood at $230 billion last year.
We set a goal of reaching a bilateral trade volume of $300 billion by 2015 and agreed to provide improved conditions.
Presidents Park and Xi also agreed to allow direct transaction of their local currencies as early as possible. Only 1% of Korean companies with enough yuan can currently settle their trading bills with Chinese partners in the Chinese currency. But once the deal takes into effect, there will be no need to convert it into the US dollar.
이번 시 주석님 방한 계기에 원 위안화 직거래 시장 개설, 한국 내 위안화 청산 결제은행 지정, 그리고 위안화 적격 해외기관 투자자 자격 부여 등 양국 간 금융 인프라 구축에 큰 성과를 이룬 것을 기쁘게 생각합니다.
Direct won-yuan trading is expected to help internationalize the Chinese currency and cut Korean traders' business costs with China by at least 3 to 5%. Hwang Sang-hee, Arirang News.
Now, we can see that Chinese President had a busy day yesterday, but he also has an extremely busy day lined up on this Friday, the last day of his short trip to Seoul. The Chinese leader is currently en route to Seoul National University to give a lecture there. Earlier this morning, as you can see on the video there, he met with parliamentary leaders from Korea's ruling and main opposition parties. After a lunch meeting with President Park, the two of them and President Xi's huge delegation of Chinese business leaders will head to a trade cooperation forum in the Korean capital. President Xi will then meet with a group of Chinese residents living here in Seoul before flying out at around 6:30 p.m. Korea time. Now, you may think the outcome of the summit talks between South Korea and China might have stirred some reaction, at least from the Japanese government, but you'd be wrong. Tokyo remained tight-lipped, but media outlets in Japan say the Abe administration might be relieved. Historical issues, very sensitive historical issues, in fact, were not brought up by Seoul and Beijing in their joint declaration. Connie Kim reports.
Japan's government had no official word on the recent Korea-China talks.
The Japanese government wants to avoid making comments on the two countries' summit talks.
But its local media seem to find relief that Seoul and Beijing's joint declaration did not mention the historical issues that have been plaguing Tokyo's relations between both countries. Instead, Japanese media were particularly keen on noting that Seoul and Beijing's agreement on the joint research regarding comfort women didn't make it into the televised joint statement, but rather in a supplemental clause. And some Japanese media have interpreted cooperation by South Korea and China on historical issues, such as Beijing's registration of historical records regarding the so-called comfort women with UNESCO, upon the request of the Korean government, as evidence that pressure against Tokyo will heighten following President Xi's visit to Korea. China has seen its relations with Japan sink to their lowest levels in recent years from territorial disputes in the East China Sea over a group of islands. And it's a similar story between Korea and Japan, as President Park lashed out at Tokyo for its review of its landmark apology for wartime sex slavery. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
Now, while there's been a lot of diplomacy between South Korea and China, the other two major players in Northeast Asia are cozying up themselves, really. Japan and North Korea are moving along with their recent agreement, which is to reopen the probe on Japanese abductees. This in return for the removal of some sanctions on Pyongyang. Connie Lee has more.
Following months of government-level talks and an agreement made back in May, Japan will ease some sanctions on North Korea. This in return for Pyongyang's commitment to reinvestigate the abductions of Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe did not elaborate on which sanctions will be lifted, but told reporters on Thursday that this was merely the beginning of more things to come.
Under the principle of action being repaid with action, I want to lift part of the sanctions Japan has imposed. However, this is just a start.
The bilateral sanctions that Japan could be lifting include travel bans to and from Pyongyang, restrictions on how much money can be sent or brought into the communist state, and port calls by North Korean ships to Japan. In 2002, North Korea admitted to abducting 13 Japanese citizens in the 70s and 80s to help train their spies. Pyongyang called the case closed after returning 5 people back to Japan and declaring that the 8 others were dead. However, Japan has since disputed that and believes even more people were kidnapped.
The abductee issue is a very serious human rights issue and something specific to our country.
Now in 2014, North Korea says it is launching a new committee to look into the case. And according to the Sankei newspaper, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will oversee it.
We have been informed that North Korea has completed its preparations and is ready to begin, so we think they indeed will do so.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Now, the South Korean government has expressed concern about Japan's decision to lift some of its sanctions against North Korea, like that report pointed out. This after Pyongyang agreed to reopen an investigation into Japanese nationals abducted by the North. Well, Foreign Ministry spokesperson No Kwang-il said Thursday that the process should be carried out in a transparent manner so that it doesn't undermine Seoul and Washington's efforts to get North Korea to give up its nuclear ambitions. The ministry did say, however, that it's frequently communicating with Tokyo on the matter and added the abduction of Japanese citizens by the North is a humanitarian issue and that South Korea hopes for a swift resolution. Now, 2 Coast Guard officials have been arrested on charges of failing to carry out their duties at the time of the Seoul ferry disaster. The district court in the southwestern city of Gwangju says one is a 43-year-old center leader of the Jindo VTS Control Center and the other, a 39-year-old CCTV footage administrator. Now, the court says the control center was unable to detect early signs of unusual activity over the waters they were monitoring on the morning of April 16th. This is the day of the ferry sinking. The control center was found to have fraudulently written the transcript of communications between the center and crew members on board the Seoul ferry. The investigation is also looking into whether the center leader ordered his subordinates to erase weeks of CCTV footage inside the center that would indicate a negligence of duty. Time now for a look through the international headlines we're following on this Friday morning. For that, we turn to our Eunice Kim standing by at the news centre. Good morning, Eunice.
Good morning, Mark.
So, more trouble in the Middle East. Israel is reinforcing its border with the Gaza Strip as skirmishes now continue there on the ground.
You're absolutely right, Mark. Israel is moving reinforcements to its southern border with the Gaza Strip after some 30 rockets were fired into Israeli territory. The two sides have been trading fire. The Israeli Air Force had launched some 70 airstrikes against Hamas targets in Gaza in recent weeks. Israel says the boosting of forces is defensive in nature. Hamas officials told the Associated Press it hoped the exchange of fire would cease as the group had no interest in a hostile escalation. This as street battles continue to break out in East Jerusalem, triggered by the discovery of the burned body of a Palestinian teen. Angry Palestinians in the teen's neighborhood hurled stones and firebombs at Israeli security forces, who responded with rubber bullets, tear gas, and smoke grenades. Israeli investigators have yet to confirm the circumstances of Kuter's death, but it has raised suspicions of a reprisal attack against the kidnap and murder of 3 Israeli teens whose bodies were found days earlier. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko says he is ready to renew a ceasefire with pro-Russian separatists if it is observed by both sides. Russia's news agency RIA Novosti reports Poroshenko, in a phone call with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden, outlined other conditions, including freeing all hostages and controlling battle lines in eastern Ukraine by the OSCE. Meanwhile, the leaders of France and Germany have asked Russian President Vladimir Putin to intervene and encourage the separatists to return to talks by July 5th to define conditions for the ceasefire, this according to the French presidential office. A day of rage was declared by the Muslim Brotherhood, sparking bomb blasts and clashes in Egypt on the one-year mark since the overthrow of Islamist President Mohamed Morsi. Morsi was Egypt's first elected leader, ousted by the military led by sitting leader and former army chief Abdel Fattah al-Sisi following large-scale protests. Meanwhile, Amnesty International has described Egypt's human rights situation in the past year as, quote, failing at every level. It said at least 16,000 people were detained to silence opposition. Many suffered, quote, harrowing incidents of torture and deaths in police custody. At least 80 are said to have died while in custody. And finally, an unfinished overpass has collapsed in the World Cup host city of Belo Horizonte in Brazil, falling on a busy road below and trapping a commuter bus, 2 construction trucks, and a small passenger car. At least 2 people were killed and dozens others injured. It is not yet clear whether any foreigners were in those vehicles. The site of the accident was located 3 kilometers away from Mineirão Stadium, where World Cup games are being played. It is not yet clear also what caused the bridge to collapse.
Said that a team of South Korea.
Get connected to Korea and the world. Join us every weekday for the latest developments out of Korea, Asia, and beyond. On air, on your mobile, and online, we lead the way every day. Arirang News.
To try and resolve the crisis in Ukraine, the European Union also offers $15 billion. Stocks on Wall Street soared on Thursday, buoyed by a June jobs report that far outstripped analysts' expectations. The US economy added almost 300,000 new jobs, which helped drive the unemployment rate down to its lowest point in nearly 6 years. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Workers in the U.S. finally had something to celebrate. American jobs growth was stronger than expected last month. The U.S. economy added 288,000 jobs in June, according to a report by Bureau of Labor Statistics on Thursday. This helped drive the unemployment rate down to 6.1% from 6.3% in May. It's the slowest rate since September 2008.
I have no doubt that relative to the first quarter, the next 3 calendar quarters, including the second quarter, will be a lot stronger, and this employment report is consistent with that view.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average topped 17,000 for the first time Thursday, and the gains were broad, confirming expectations the U.S. economy recovered in the second quarter after a dismal start to the year. The S&P 500 climbed near the 2,000 mark. The Nasdaq closed at its highest point since the year 2000. Investors will have to wait until next week to see if the gaining streak is going to continue, though, since there's no trading on Friday due to its Independence Day in the United States. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Now, the curtain has gone up here in Korea on a theatrical performance dealing with the horrors faced by the Korean victims of Japan's system of wartime sex slavery. The play's Japanese creator says Tokyo cannot have a clear conscience, accusing the victims of being liars when there is so much evidence out there to prove otherwise. Park Ji-won reports.
In this monologue play, former wartime sex slave Young Ja recounts her life story. When she was young, Korea was under the Japanese colonial rule, and she was sent to Japan thinking she was going to work in a factory. Upon her arrival, however, she was forced into sexual slavery. She was just 14 years old. The play's creator says the piece is titled Liar Young Ja, as it accuses the Japanese government of making former sex slaves liars.
Through the play, I aim to criticize the Abe administration. As you can see on this stage backdrop, I posted the face of Prime Minister Abe to criticize the administration's recent moves.
80-year-old veteran Japanese playwright Fujita Asaya says he wanted to tell the truth with a play that's written based on facts and research, as he couldn't bear to watch the Japanese government conceal the obvious truth. Despite threats from far-right extremists in Japan, the play was performed in 1995. But Asaya is furious that nothing much changed in almost 2 decades.
It's basically the same as 20 years ago. In fact, the situation in Japan has gotten worse. I'm so angry. I want the Korean people to know that there are many more angry Japanese people like myself.
The monodrama will be staged in major cities in Korea this year and will be put on stage in China later this year. Asaya plans to take the show to other countries as well, including the Philippines and Japan, and some European countries in the years to come. 박지원, Arirang News.
And TGI Friday, everyone, as we kick things off with the South Korean national football team. Now, earlier yesterday, the KFA announced that manager Hong Myung-bo will continue his role as the head coach of the national team, which is good news for some. But what's next for him and his team? Well, according to the KFA, the team is scheduled to face off against Jordan in a friendly for their final A match this year on November 14th in Jordan. But shortly after that comes the 2015 Asian Cup in Australia, where manager Hong Myung-bo is now pressured to do big things with this team in this tournament. But the big question is, what kind of changes will be made and how will this affect the future of Park Ju-young? And now moving over to baseball, where it's now official as the New York Yankees have signed a young talent from Yatap High School named Park Hyo-jun. Now, Park, who is the star shortstop for Yatap High School, has agreed to sign with the Yankees for $1.16 million and will begin playing ball in Single-A minor league team. The 18-year-old has been highly sought by the Yankees and is known as a five-tool player. Now, the Yankees stated that they'll raise him to be the player who will one day fill the void left by Derek Jeter when he retires after the season. And now moving over to some Thursday night KBO action, the LG Twins win again over the Hanwha Eagles 5-4, with the Nexen Heroes beating the Lotte Giants 10-9, and the NC Dinos beat the SK Wyverns 11-7. Meanwhile, let's take a look at the Doosan Bears take on the Kia Tigers. Now, of course, going into the game here, first inning, Lee Dae-hyung, an RBI double to left center field gives the Kia Tigers the 1-0 lead before Na Ji-won makes it 2-0 with an RBI single to right. But now in the fourth inning of the game with the man on, Choi Jae-hoon drills this ball to deep left field and gone. We're tied 2-2. But next inning, An Chi-hong at bat, and there it goes to deep right field. Gone, a 3-run shot, and Kia takes the lead 5-2. Sixth inning, more from Kia. This time Kim Joo-chan, and no doubt about it, and it's now 6-2. We shift over to the ninth inning. Chung Soo-bin pinch hits, and there he goes, back, gone 6-3. But the Kia Tigers would hang on to win this game, 6-3, your final score. And now finishing things off with the 2014 Brazil World Cup. Now we've seen Van Persieing memes based on Luis Suarez, and now the biggest internet craze is hashtag things Tim Howard could have saved. Now, after the U.S. goalkeeper made a record 16 saves in their 2-1 loss to Belgium, fans showed appreciation by photoshopping pictures of him with themes, things Tim Howard could have saved. Now, this including U.S. goalkeeper saving Mufasa of Lion King, the dinosaurs from extinction, and even Luis Suarez from biting Giorgio Chiellini. Now, not only that, someone decided to update a Wikipedia page on the U.S. Secretary of Defense naming Tim Howard as the current U.S. Secretary of Defense. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
Good morning. Well, we're looking at a clear skies here in Seoul this morning, and it's supposed to be a rain-free day for most areas, while easterly winds will trigger sudden showers to the eastern coastal region. So while the eastern parts of the region will have some cool readings, the rest will see temperatures rebounding again to 30s, and it should get even sunnier as the day goes on. I mean, we can easily tell by looking at a UV index. People in the west will be exposed to stronger sunshine, so be sure to gear up with sun protection items today. And the weather outlook for this weekend, lots of sun and hot temperatures are in store for here in the capital, but passing showers are in store for some regions down south. So do keep that in mind. And here are the readings for today. The high in Seoul and Daegu will rise to 30 and 29, while Gwangju and Busan will peak to 28 and 26. Now for other regions, down on Jeju and Daejeon will peak to 25 and 30 respectively, and Dokdo should see a high of 22 this afternoon. Well, that's all for me at this hour, and hope you have a wonderful Friday.
Well, that's all we have for now. We'll be back with another newscast at noon Korea time. Until then, goodbye.